Yeah. So just to begin with, I want to thank everyone who found their way here despite the almost provocatively boring title. My name is Leonhard Dobusch. I'm a professor in economics in Innsbruck. Until June 17th, I'm a member of the ZTF organizational board in Germany, and after that I will be member of the board in Austria for public broadcasting. And that already gets us to this question I want to talk about, and which I also picked partially based on this year's motto of Generation XYZ. Maybe a cooler title could have been How Public Broadcasting Has Been Destroying Private Newspapers for Generations. Why? So from the perspective of newspaper publishers, they already started with this when TV still looked like this. So for the younger people in the audience, this is a TV, a so-called cathode ray TV. So the picture was not composed of different pixels, individual pixels, but having
through emissions from cathode rays, there were produced 3 electron rays that on the specifically laminated part of a screen lead to an illumination. In other words, after the lecture of this Wikipedia article, I have no idea whatsoever how in the world there was ever produced an image on a cathode ray television screen. So, but we don't care about the technical details right now. But we care about times when there's not an image on the screen, and that's the vertical interval blanking. That happened when this electron ray went black to jump back from the lower right to the top left of the screen. And of course, this image is from the Wikipedia article from vertical interval blanking. I have no idea why there's a sheep as an example. It's not like, there's no joke here. So anyway, it was illustrated using this image, and you can see up there, that's this vertical interval blanking interval. So why is this relevant? Well, at some point in the 70s, people who understood how this technology worked found out that you could use this interval to spread information. So at first you needed a separate box to receive this information, but later on it was integrated into television models. And of course I'm talking about teletext, which you might not know if you're from the US. So how did I create these texts? So I can assure you, internet didn't kill teletext, because there are still subdomains of these programs, of these stations, where you can look at this teletext. And my father still does that on his iPhone in order to, I don't know, gain information, read the news. So you might have teletext lovers in your family as well. So it hasn't yet died completely as a medium. But what is this talk about? When this teletext first broadcast in the 70s in this vertical interval, then there was quite a commotion going on about it. And now there's a quote from Der Spiegel article from 1977. And it said that the Publishers Association wants to connect a provisional printing device to its screen newspaper at the Funkausstellung and put the broadcast text on paper piece by piece. The TV industry is already quite a bit further along in the development of such home printers than the publishers, but is still holding back to its prototypes so as not to further inflame the media political conflict. Because teletext printed, that would be a press product, just like a newspaper. So, 1977, it was brand new bleeding edge technology, and then 79, it still wasn't rolled out. And yet another quote from Der Spiegel, the previously clear boundaries between various media are beginning to blur. Media convergence, anyone? So these so-called home printers, once they are ready for mass production, will one day replace the daily newspaper in its current form. Not the paperboy, but the print roller on the TV set at home would then bring the morning paper. All right, so we can see with this vertical blanking interval and teletext, it would be the demise of printed newspapers. And of course, we know that people who deliver newspapers by hand are still around, right? But of course, this was already like a party politics issue back then. So my favorite part from the 1977 article from Der Spiegel: both sides have long cultivated electronic enemy images of each other. The one, the phantom of the left-wing bureaucratic political program, so ARD, ZDF, the public broadcasters. The others, the chimera of right-wing commercial tingle-tangle. So ever since The Simpsons, we know that this is such a nice quote. I really want to point it out. False balance, false equivalency, right? Ever since The Simpsons, we know that left-wing bureaucratic political program that might be boring, but tingle-tangle, sideshow, Bob, that might be deathly, right? So, yeah, you might know this character because he's famous for trying to kill Bart Simpson. So this was a real issue. This was a real point of conflict back then. Between 1977 and 79, before teletext was officially introduced. So that now we come to the question that the obituaries of printed press products were premature, to say the least. So how did they prevent this? Okay, the last long quote, I promise. A cameraman named Rosencrantz, he looked in his master's thesis at this thing, and then apparently the press publishers and the public broadcasters made a compromise. In a compromise, the two parties agreed on self-restriction of the broadcasters in teletext and the participation of the press publishers in the content. By restricting themselves to program-related content, the newspapers would not face any competition from current news and would still be able to participate in teletext. So, the decisive point here, the restriction on program-related content in teletext, that was done in 1980. And thus, we have a new entity that was being created by then, a program relation. So this restriction on stuff in teletext having to do with the actual broadcasts on television, if we now fast forward to 2025, then we can see that this restriction on TV program content is still like haunting us as a sort of zombie throughout German media regulation. So the heads of the German states debated last year on reforming the state treaty, which is right now being passed through all these 16 state parliaments. It's even stricter, right? Text still may only be published if they're related to the TV programming. So, and the background, it hasn't changed. It's just like 1977 or 79. It's still trying to protect private press publishers from being destroyed and undermined by public broadcasting press products. So why is this such a product? In 2017, I nominated this as the bad word of the year. this press likeness, press similarity. But so what does that mean even, press? Like, it's intermedial, right? It's multimedia. For years it's been that way. So, like, did public broadcasters become like press publishers, or did press publishers become like public broadcasting companies? So why don't we try to outlaw being similar to public broadcasting? And these restrictions lead to worse quality in the content that the public broadcasting companies can offer.
Right. For example, like there are cases where like you need to produce a video where a text would make more sense or would be faster, and this is already a problem. And in the future, like obviously texts will continue to be important for some AI apps. They're still like they're already relevant. For example, if people are getting their information via AI bots, if they want to access information through these new applications, then of course it's difficult if the texts from the public broadcasters are not available as texts or only with like significant delays. To explain this very practically and like illustrate this using a very specific example. Currently, there's already a ban on these press similar contents. Right now, a topic can be discussed in a text on, and later you can add things. There can be additions to videos from the TV programming. In the future, the text can only be published at 7:20 p.m. at the earliest if it was reported in the 7 p.m. news. So I think at this conference it's pretty clear to everyone that at a time where this whole idea of linear TV program is completely already out of time, completely backwards, having like really tightening this restriction and making the rules even stricter when it comes to this definition of press similarity, that's obviously like a hurdle that hinders public broadcasting. And obviously we can ask, is this ban on press similar content, is that something that is like in the interest of the protection of private media? Is that like appropriate for like the digital age? And to answer this, I want to kind of go back to where we started and to look at how the relationship between public broadcasting and private commercial media has changed over time, considering like this idea of press similarity. And some of this is difficult to imagine today, or it's possible to imagine today. For example, in the 70s, which is like difficult to imagine at this, right now, some people in this room were probably not even born yet. For one, there were different hemispheres. There was like printed press that was dropped in front of your door by the newspaper boy, and then there was public broadcasting, especially TV. They were completely hermetically sealed, separated from each other. They probably they both had approximately 100% reach, and nobody could really compete in the other's sphere until the introduction of private commercial TV in 1984. In 1984, having private TV meant that essentially the sphere of private commercial media expanded, and the first private TV stations were created, while the public broadcasters were essentially left alone. And then in 1995, the internet was created and was founded, and they were the first online and internet offerings. At the time, of course, the private publishers invested in that as well as did the online broadcasters. And based on the development guarantee, public broadcasters were also allowed to put things online. But one thing that very few people know, the most successful offering online by public broadcasters was Funk in 2016. But in order to be able to found Funk in 2016, they had to first close down several other stations. So they had to close down ZDF Culture and One Live to create something new. So during this time, private publishers did not always succeed in finding successful business models. We all know about the struggles with profitability, of private publishers, but that was certainly not due to the overwhelming power of public broadcasters, but it was due to the rise of large digital online platforms that were financed by ads, and these huge platforms that started rising in the early 2000s. All of Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, they basically all work the same way and essentially are all similar to each other. And if you look at this development, then the rise of the social web after 2000, you can essentially observe a duplication of private commercial offers all the way to private commercial media platforms where even public broadcasters need to conform to the algorithm if they want to reach people. But in a world where you essentially started with these completely separated from each other worlds and hemispheres, that's completely unimaginable today, because a world where everything exists on the internet, it's completely impossible. And it's probably good that we're not in that world of the 70s anymore, that I really want to emphasize that, right? It's not that it's all bad, that you only get to watch public broadcasting TV or private published newspaper. If there was not this problem, this issue of the right-wing commercial tingle-tangle, and so Sideshow Bob. And that's how we get to the second part of my title, from press similarity and program relation, program basedness to public broadcasting innovation as public broadcasting innovation hindrances. So I think that these rules and requirements in an age of the internet, that I don't think it's enough to protect private media. And there certainly are consequences, but I think that this restriction on public broadcasting, I think, is one of the reasons that this right-wing commercial tingle-tangle has become so overwhelming that it is now threatening the very foundations of our democracy. So then we need to ask, could public broadcasters innovate if they were allowed to, right? Because I just put out the hypothesis that public broadcasters could have more reach, they could be more present, they could be more successful in online spaces if we didn't artificially restrict them with these rules. There's another much more prominent Republica speaker who has a strong opinion on this, and talking about the destruction of Twitter. He talked in a private online outlet. He raised the idea of creating public social media networks, and he called that grotesque Airbus nonsense. So the idea of having kind of new publicly run social media platforms. What he meant was, well, yes, Europe previously managed to, Airbus is an example of Europe succeeding in creating a competitive rival to Boeing, but Europe completely failed when it comes to, for example, creating a search engine alternative to Google, referring to the example of Quero. And Sascha Lobo says that trying to create a social network is much closer to this failed example of a search engine, is much closer to that failed example than Airbus. And so essentially he says the government cannot innovate on these digital platforms. And I appreciate him a lot. I quite like his presentations usually, but I think he's making two mistakes here. First, he's missing that the starting point of public broadcasters is completely different from Quero, this failed European search engine. And second, he misses the fact that public innovation can be different and must and probably should be different from Silicon Valley venture capitalism, California innovation dynamics that we see on these private platforms. So what would a public broadcasting public Airbus look like? So what would that look like? So one example that I immediately think of is the most successful streaming platform on the internet beyond YouTube is Netflix. And so that's a recent screenshot of the Netflix homepage. And this is a recent screenshot of the German public broadcasting online streaming service. If there wasn't a logo, then you can basically only tell them apart based on, basically on that. But you can really not, you can barely tell that there's a difference anymore. And I will talk about the similarities later. But it's not like these similarities are not just about usability and design, but it also affects reach. When it comes to public broadcasters, so the first and the second station, ARD and ZDF, they were actually used they're very close to Netflix in terms of numbers of users. It's like they're basically playing in the same league. All the way to the right, you can see YouTube. That's different. Why is that out there? Of course, because YouTube isn't just a unidirectional streaming platform. It's user-generated content. It's completely different. And I've previously been here and essentially argued that public broadcasters should orient themselves more towards YouTube than Netflix, but that's a different topic. I've spoken about that before. So it's not the case that the starting point is that public broadcasters have nothing and that they're starting from nothing, and then you just somehow artificially get people there. They have platforms. There are millions of people already. Millions of people already use every day, and where millions of people regularly log into these platforms, they have user accounts. But if these people if they want to talk about these public broadcasting contents on these platforms, then we send them elsewhere and tell them, oh no, to have discussions, please go over to Instagram or YouTube. We don't want to have you here. That's the current status quo of basically this public broadcasting Netflix. So I think it's called off ZDF. But I feel like I can already tell, or maybe I'm imagining it, but I can hear people say, copying a website, everyone can do that, phishing scammers are able to do that. So is that actually innovation? If German public broadcaster basically copies Netflix and just rebuilds Netflix. So if you, as previously said by Steve Jobs, that good artists copy, great artists steal. Although he misattributed this to Picasso, even though it's originally his own quote. And of course, I have another state's witness, someone who wrote about the basic concept of innovation. He's actually Austrian and has a relationship to my university. His name is Josef Schumpeter. And in 1911, in his book, A Theory on Economic Development, he said about innovation, what is innovation? Innovation is the production of a previously unknown good. And then he says, and this is a part that's interesting for us, on the same level, of course, is the introduction of a new quality of a good or a new use of an already known good. So the question is not what is innovation, but what is public broadcasting innovation? And my response would be that public broadcasting innovation is just like other innovation. It copies, it transforms, it recombines. And everything that's new only comes from copying, transforming, and recombining existing things. It's always been like that, and it will always be like that. And so what does this mean for public broadcasting? Then this copying, transforming, and recombining needs to happen based on this democratic purpose of being of these platforms, this democratic this goal of supporting democracy and being part of democracy. And if you look at this, of course, this is about looking at why people like being on these platforms and learning about that. Of course, why would I reinvent features that succeeded there? Meta does that either. When Snapchat had the idea that stories would be a good idea, then Meta immediately introduced stories on Instagram and killed Snapchat's growth. Right? So with a lot of goodwill, you could call this creative copying. But so interaction, comments, user-generated content, features, there's a lot of copying going on here. At the same time, there are also other things that you maybe don't want to copy, like polarization, echo chambers, disinformation, radicalization. So public broadcasting innovation would mean accepting things that make sense and maybe changing things that cause these effects and that lead to these effects. And what I really want to emphasize, again, is that all these big platforms are also examples of what Cory Doctorow calls enshittification. And I think that's really the strongest and most important strongest argument for public broadcasting innovation, because public innovation would be online platform design without enshittification. So platforms essentially orienting themselves first and foremost towards the users, and then driving down usability and just pressing every last cent from them through ads. Like this enshittification, that's something that's coming from private commercial innovation, right? Which Lobo celebrates with his grotesque Airbus nonsense citation. So just the ability to just not enshittify is a huge strength of potential strength of public innovation. So what is public broadcasting, public innovation, specifically? Very concretely, very specifically, it might involve having recommendation algorithms that are transparent and follow a different logic than the profit-driven commercial platforms, and also explaining these algorithms both for the public but also for nerds who want to maybe copy that, turn it into open source, build their own version and implement it based on open standards. So for example, right now, algorithmen.zdf.de already does this. This involves building comment sections that are not a hellhole of hate and fringe opinions, but that enable democratic debates. For example, BBC, ZDF, public broadcasting across Europe is already doing based on open, or is already developing based on open standards, and they want to start implementing that and make that available for use this year. It also, public broadcasting innovation also means including the Fediverse in platforms in a way that basically, so people end up in the Fediverse without knowing that they're on the Fediverse, because people also don't know how a TV works to turn it on. That's the best example. This too is something that people in public broadcasting are already working on. For example, in this case, in a cooperation between the SWR and Mastodon. So just to come back to this picture that I drew of the development of private commercial and public broadcasters over time. So I would say, as a concrete, specific vision, there would be something that Frank Lobix, an economist from Dortmund, recently said in an analysis of the potential of public broadcasters, what he called a digital public open space, or digital open public space. It's not about what it's called, but the point is that the goal is to organize and shape a larger part of our public discourse space based on these public ideals and in opposition to this right-wing tangle that dominates these public commercial platforms. How would that work? So it work with it should be based on it would be based on a decentralized principle, which would mean that everyone, regardless of where they are, can participate in this. That means podcasters, people who run museums and art galleries, universities, Wikipedia, which is already very active on there, the existing public broadcasters, they can already start participating, they can already start building a part of this decentralized new public or open space. It's not going to happen on the same curve as the Silicon Valley. It'll take time, but that's exactly why it will work differently from these platforms that we need an alternative for really badly. I would like to thank everyone who came here today, anyone who's interested in what I will do in the future at the ORF. There will be a blog. I'll see you at the next Republica. Thank you. Thank you, Leonhard Dobusch.